The G7 is in trouble. There's a new rival in town, the BRICS group. BRICS is fast rising, a threat to the G7. Is the global dominance shifting, or is it just a myth? Are we seeing the end of the G7 and the beginning of the BRICS? How did we even get here? It's November 15, 1975, in France. Leaders of six major economies, France, West Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US, gather for the first G7 summit. The group's foundation lies in the economic turmoil of the 1970s, during the oil crisis and the subsequent global recession. At the time, it was just an informal gathering with one aim: to provide a forum for these industrialized democracies to discuss and coordinate economic policies. The idea was to foster stability in a world that was increasingly interconnected and at the time quite volatile. Canada joined the group in 1978, solidifying the G7 as the premier forum for the world's most advanced economies. In 1998, Russia was invited to join the G7, creating the G8. This move was seen as an attempt to integrate Russia into the Western economic and political system. Over the years, the G7 has played a critical role in global governance, coordinating responses to financial crises like the 2008 meltdown, and addressed major geopolitical issues. The reality is that the G7 has always held so much power since its creation, and they have always made so many decisions for the whole world, that's for the global economies in general, and it has always affected global politics and control for every country, even countries that were not part of the G7. And we've had international crises in the past, like the 2008 financial crisis.
So I think this is the most significant financial crisis in the post-war period.
There are fears the sell-off will continue on Wall Street.
Soaring gas prices, falling home prices, and rising unemployment.
And the G7 has always been responsive to this crisis, but they had many flaws. First, the G7 was only made up of the world's top powers, as I can say, kind of like the big boys club, with no African country and other southern nations. They made the decisions by themselves. And in many cases, they made these decisions which also affected even the African countries themselves. So I believe BRICS has been capitalizing on this aspect to bring in more emerging nations, more nations that are still developing, in order to build a forum that gives everyone a platform to be able to share their views, as compared to the G7, which was just the top powers, so I can say. Decisions like the ones made during the 2008 financial crisis, which every country was affected. But as the 21st century unfolded, the world began to change, and so did the balance of power. Then came the BRICS, or BRIC at the time without South Africa, an acronym coined by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill in 2001. Jim believed the four BRIC would come to dominate the global economy by 2050. Originally, it stood for Brazil, Russia, India, and China, with South Africa joining later in 2010. In 2009, BRICS held its first summit in Russia. This was more than just a meeting. It was a statement, a declaration that these emerging economies wanted a bigger say in global affairs. In March of 2014, Russia was suspended indefinitely following the annexation of Crimea, which led to a revert to G7. And in January 2017, Russia announced its permanent withdrawal from the G8. This expulsion underscored the geopolitical tensions that continue to shape global politics. Now, the expulsion of Russia from the G8 came as a shock to many, and actually it made Russia feel like the rejected stone, as I can say. And I believe this was part of the reasons why Russia realized that they had to put in more efforts into creating an option or another organization that could stand strong against the G7, which then pushed Russia much closer with China, who has always been at loggerheads with the United States and other G7 powers. So with Russia and China now being together, they put in so much effort into creating the BRICS, which is definitely trying to dominate the G7. So as we can see, Russia being expelled from the G8 and joining China to make the BRICS much stronger definitely grew into a threat for the G7. While Russia turned its focus towards BRICS, the G7 faced a new challenge from within and outside its ranks. BRICS was seen as a symbol of the shifting economic landscape. These emerging economies were expected to outpace the traditional powers of the G7 by 2050. But what began as an economic concept quickly evolved into a political bloc, and they have been making significant strides so far. China's economy surpassed the United States in terms of GDP by purchasing power strength in 2013, and BRICS countries today account for over 37.3% of global GDP and 45% of the world's population. But the journey hasn't been smooth. While the BRICS nations have substantial economic clout, converting this into political power has been a challenge, mainly due to deep geopolitical tensions and back and forth relations, especially between China and India. Despite these challenges, BRICS continues to push for greater influence. Recently, the group has been making headlines by suggesting a shift away from the US dollar in trade, creating their own BRICS payment system, and have even been expanding their membership, with many countries sending in applications to join the BRICS. But the G7 hasn't taken this challenge lying down. Reason why over the years, they've imposed sanctions on BRICS members, especially Russia and China, all in response to geopolitical actions. These sanctions are part of the broader struggle between the two groups. It's a battle for control over the future of global governance. Multiple sanctions like freezing of Russian finances due to the war in Ukraine and sanctions on China's steel, China's EVs, Huawei and semiconductors are definitely aspects that have pushed Russia and China to be able to put more efforts into the BRICS and of course to expand the BRICS influence. And these sanctions are not just from the United States alone, but also from the EU, as can be seen recently from the increase in tariffs on Chinese EVs to the EU. So the reality is that BRICS seems to have achieved a whole lot in only a few years. Leaders from both sides have weighed in on this.
We're working with our allies toward a new strategic concept that will help our alliance better take on evolving threats of today and tomorrow.
中方将举办第3届“一带一路”国际合作高峰论坛。我们愿同“一带一路”共建国和欧亚经济联盟成员国一道，继续高举和平、发展、合作、共赢旗帜，共享机遇，共克时艰，共创未来，携手谱写多极化世界文明进步新篇。
Even Narendra Modi of India said the BRICS has become a platform for the global south to express their aspirations and pursue their developmental goals. The latest BRICS summit in South Africa saw the group expand, welcoming new members like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Argentina. This expansion is a clear sign that the BRICS is gaining momentum, as siding with nations like Saudi Arabia has been a big blow for the G7. This move challenges the traditional hegemony and shows that BRICS is serious about reshaping the global landscape. So what does this all mean? Is the rise of BRICS and the fall of the G7 a reality or just a myth? Well, on one hand, BRICS nations have economic strength and a growing influence, and their strength and control seems to keep growing fast. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the G7, despite facing crises like economic collapses, currency problems, and a shifting global order, still holds significant power and influence. But the key differences lie in the cohesion and unity among G7 members, which BRICS is working hard to build. But the reality is that the world is more interconnected than ever, and the rise of BRICS signifies a multipolar world where power is more evenly distributed, and this could lead to a more balanced global governance. But it also comes with the risk of increased geopolitical tensions. So, as BRICS continues to grow and challenge the status quo, the G7 must adapt or risk losing its dominant position. The next few years will be crucial in determining whether BRICS can truly rise to the occasion, or if the G7 will maintain its grip on global affairs. So how do these two groups stack up against each other? Well, let's break it down. The G7 still leads in terms of per capita income and technological advancement, but BRICS, with its vast population and economic growth, is quickly closing the gap. What's fascinating is the difference in approach. The G7 relies on established institutions and frameworks, while BRICS is pushing for a new world order, one less dominated by Western influence. So, is the rise of BRICS and the fall of G7 a reality or just a myth? The truth lies somewhere in between. At the end of the day, the reality is that BRICS seems to have achieved a whole lot in only a few years or just a little over a decade. And I personally feel like there's so much more to come. The fact that BRICS is giving a chance for every developing country to be able to join the organization is definitely a big plus for the BRICS, and of course a huge threat to the G7, because the truth is that even developing countries have something to offer, maybe raw materials or resources which can definitely help each other to grow in trade. And with the BRICS capitalizing on this, it gives them the advantage because even the G7 leaders still need raw materials and trade. So as more members keep joining the BRICS, there will be more free trade between them, just like Saudi Arabia, who recently started accepting different currencies for their oil. Well, like this video, subscribe to this channel for more videos like this weekly, and of course I'll bring you more information on this topic as it unfolds. Thank you so much for watching this video. Remember, this is Willen. See you next time.